So let's move on to Android Studio here. Here I've already created a button, and I've already assigned a set on click listener to it. We have already covered that in this series, so you can take a look at that also if you have you don't know how to set the click listeners on a button, right? So here I have set the on click listener, and here you can see I have set an on click function. So if the function is going to be r.id.add task, which is basically this button add task, here you can see the id here. Now what I'm just trying to do is, if this button is clicked, I want to send the post request, right? So that's the important part of this tutorial. So let's start with it. The first task to send a post request is to create, the first thing is we are going to create a URL, and here I'm going to specify the URL string. This URL will be the URL that is actually going to point to the file that we have, which is basically HTTP. Make sure it is not HTTPS, right? So it is http://localhost/insert task.php file. So this was the URL of the file that we created. We just created this file with the PHP scripting where we are going to send the post request, right? Now the next part is to create a object of string request, right? So just type string, and you can see here just type string re, and you can see the first option here, com.android.volley.toolbox. Just double click on it and it will automatically import that class. One important part is you need to perform this very first is in the Android manifest file. You will have to first specify the permission of the internet permission, which is by using uses permission android name android.permission.internet. The second important part is in the app level build.gradle file where we have dependencies here, right? So here we will have to specify the Volley library which we are implementing. So here you can see in this line, this is the way to define a library, Volley library, which is implementation com.android.volley, and then we will specify this colon and then Volley and then the version which is 1.2.0, right? So this is how we will specify this, and when we will rebuild this project, we will be able to get all these string request object. Now we want to create an object, so I will call the object as string request, and we know that to create an object we will have to use the new operator, and then we will write string request. Inside this object we will have to specify some things which are very important. So the first parameter that we need to specify is just type request here, and when you are typing request you can see it shows request com.android.volley on top. Just double click on it and then type dot, and you can see some options here. Method priority, we will have to specify the method, then again dot, the method is going to be post, so I'm going to select the post one here. So this is the first parameter that we will provide to this function, to this constructor here. Basically it is going to call the constructor with the post variable here. The next thing is to specify the URL where we want to send the post request, and the last part is very simple. We just need to specify the response that this will give me. So after we will run this, you can see if I type response, it will show on the top listener. So just double click on it, and here it will show that this is actually the response, and this is where we are going to use lambda here. So after running this request, it will generate some response. So after we will run this URL, this file insert task.php, it is going to generate some response also. So we can capture that response here. So we will say that at this point, if we get any response here, I will just show a toast message using toast.makeText, and here I will specify main activity dot this, and I will show that the connection is basically successful because we have got a response from the web server. And then I will just specify toast dot length long and then dot show function to show this. Alright, so you can see here inside of the string request object which we have created, you can see the first parameter we are giving is this post method, the second one is the URL, the third parameter is the response where we are going to write something like this. So we can write this response here and it goes like this. Response is actually a lambda here, so basically there are no curly braces here. And now we are going to just write the next parameter, which is the error, right? So there are basically 1, 2, 3, 4 parameters that we can provide inside of this string request constructor, right? These are the parameters. So now we are going to close this by using this circular bracket. Now you can see this is actually here you can see the highlighted circular bracket here. So now we have successfully given this string request all the required parameters: post, URL, response, which we will get after this request will be this post request will execute. If we get some response, it is going to display success message. If there is any error in executing this request, it is going to display a error message because we are using a lambda like this. Now we have successfully done that. There is one last code that we want to do. Instead of writing a semicolon here, which will basically end this whole statement, what we need to do is we will have to write a code for this here. So we will open curly brackets to write some code here, and then we will write the semicolon here. So let's write some code inside of this lambda here. So basically we are providing the code that will be executed, and here what we are trying to do is we will add the parameters. So I'm going to write a comment here, add parameters to the request. So, and this is a very important part because we want to give this insert task.php to post parameters, which is the time and the task. So here we are going to use this curly brackets after this after the end of this constructor, which you can see here. I specified a curly bracket, and here we will specify the parameters. So the way to do is, first we will write override annotation, so using @override, and here I'm going to write a very important code here. So first of all, we want to give the parameters to this request. So the way to do is, first I will use a protected keyword, and then I will use map, which is basically a hash map which maps some keys to the values. So you can see it is a java.util. K stands for keys and V stands for values. So the keys which we will insert here, they all are of type string. So I'm going to write string, and the values are also of type string here. Then I will use the get params function, which is used to get the parameters, and this class can throw auth fail error, which you can see here, which is a Volley error, which says that there is some authentication failure error, which means that the post parameters which we are going to specify in this hash map is basically meeting this auth failure error, which means that there is some authentication related issues. Maybe it was denied access to by the developer, so that's why you cannot access that. So that's why I specified this error here. Now the next task is to create the parameters by using map, and here I will again specify string, which will be the keys, and the values are also of type string. And here I will create a variable parameters, which is params, and here I will just use new hash map to create a hash map. This hash map contains keys and values. So let's add some keys. So let's add some keys and values to this hash map function. The way to do is to use params.put function, and here we will specify the keys and the values. We know that the first key is task, which we know that we have implemented in the PHP file. The first parameter was actually task, which we will give as a post variable, and the value of this variable is also what we need to give. So here we will use et.getTxt function. Et is basically a variable of our edit task. So whatever the user will enter in the edit task, we are just going to fetch that text and we are going to convert it into string, because the keys and the values are of type string, right? So now we have given this value here. What this will do is it will create a map, a hash map, which will have a task variable and it will have a value which will be equivalent to whatever the user will insert in the edit text. Now we have one more parameter to add, which is time. So I'm going to write the second key, which is time. And the way to give time here is we can actually just create a variable here using the date class, right? So there is a date class. You can even use the time class if you want to. So let's write just time here. Time. I'm creating a new variable, time is equals to new time. And now what I will just do here is, alright, so let's just make this date instead of time. It will specify the whole date whenever we have inserted the task here. And here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write date dot toString function, which will just fetch the string. The date will be converted into type string, again because the values are of type string here. So now we have successfully created a hash map here using this code, where we have put two important variables, which is task and time. So what will happen is whenever we will send this string request of to the by the Volley library, what the Volley library will do, it has this map which maps the value of the post variables and the names of the post variables, which you can see here in these two lines. So it will get passed to this URL, which is this one, which we have created here on the local host, and then it will basically run the PHP file with these two parameters, and then the MySQL query, which was the insert query, will be able to simply insert it inside of the database, right? But there are some few things available still right now. We will have to first make sure that Volley library executes this string request object. So we will do that now. One important thing is that this function is going to actually has a return type of parameters. So it will return this hash map here, which we have created here. So we are going to return this hash map using return parameters. Now what we need to do is we will have to generate the request. So this is our if function. So here after this, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first create a simple variable using RequestQueue class. So RequestQueue is a com.android.volley class. So in the import, you can see I have this com.android.volley.requestQueue. So I've created a variable RequestQueue here. RequestQueue is basically a variable, or you can say it is basically a class which will put the request that we want the Volley library to execute inside of a queue, right? So if we have multiple requests, we have multiple string requests, what we can do is we can just put them in this request queue, and it will add this in the queue, and each and every request will get executed in a fashion of a queue manner. So here we have the request queue, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use request queue equals to volley dot, there is a function which is a new request queue function. So I'm going to write this here, and I will just specify the context of this class which is main activity.this. Now this will make sure that we have initialized a new request queue. So there is a new request queue that is generated and it is now pointing to this request queue variable. Now what we are going to do is we are just going to uh, add something to this request queue by using .add. And what we want to do is we want to add a string request here, so which is very simple. We have created this string request object. I'm just going to copy it here and I'm going to paste it here like this. So now we have completely done the backend part. Let's revise this part because it is very important. The first step is to create the URL. The second step is to create a variable string request, which is a request generator for the Volley library. In this, we will provide first parameter as post, then we will provide the URL. The third parameter is the response, and we will show what we want to do when a response is generated after this string request is successfully run. If there are any errors in this request, the fourth parameter here is error, and here you can see we will show this message. After the end of this constructor, we are going to specify this code here, which basically creates a a simple hash map here with the values and keys of string type. We are going to provide these two as the post variables, which is task and time, and where here we are going to make sure that the return type is parameters. And you can see this is basically because this is the actual return type that we have written when we have written this function here. Now we will use a RequestQueue variable, which is a reference to the RequestQueue class of Volley library, and we will create a new request queue using this context, and then we will simply add the request that we have created here to this request queue, which whenever we will run this function, whenever the user clicks the add task button, what is going to happen is a new request queue will be generated, and this whole request, which contains a post method and a hash map of these two variables, which is task and time, these are going to get as a post variables to the insert task.php. So now let's run this inside of the emulator, and let's see how it is working. And if it is not working fine, let's see how to troubleshoot the issues, right? So I'm just going to run. So now you can see our emulator is there. It is going to launch the application in a while. One important thing that we need to do here is, since this URL is localhost / insert task.php, there is one important task to do here. When this code is executed inside of our Android emulator, this URL localhost is actually pointing to the localhost of this emulator, right? Which is very important to understand here, that if you will run it, it will basically show you an error. So if I will type something in this task and if I will press add task, you can see it is showing a message here which is error, right? So it is happening because this local host is actually the local host of this PC, and this Android emulator is not recognizing that. So how can we resolve that issue? Well, when we are actually launching this here, the first thing is you will have to make sure that the Android emulator is launching outside of this Android Studio and not in the emulator window, not here. How you can enable it? By going to file option, you can go to settings, which is here, and here you just need to type emulator, and you can see a option here which is launch in a tool window. You just need to disable this option, click on apply, and then it is going to launch in a separate window, something like this. Now what we need to do is, you can see the three dots, the last option here, just click this option and it will open up this file, this whole window here. Just go to the settings part here, and here you can see a second tab, proxy. What you need to do here, initially it is actually set to this, you just need to disable this, and here you have the manual proxy configuration, and here you will have to specify your IPv4 address, and the port number is going to be 80. So how can you get this IPv4 address? basically in the command prompt, what you can just do is just type ipconfig. So I will just type ipconfig here, and this will basically give you a IPv4 address in this line, which you can just copy from here, and you just need to paste it here. Once you have successfully done that, copy this, right? You can now close this, and now what we have to do is, instead of localhost, we will have to change the code, and now instead of localhost, I will specify the IP address. Now this IP address is actually pointing to this computer, and I will also provide the port number by using a colon, and port number is 80. So this is going to be the final request. So now let's rerun this application on our emulator. So now it will destroy this application, and we will see if this is actually working or not by taking a look at our database also. So here I will just type something and I will click on add task button here. So now you can see it displays success. It means that it was able to execute these post parameters and it was able to execute this string request. Now let's see the changes in the database. So here in the browser you can see this to do is our database, and we have tasks here, and you can see a new entry has been added with the task, and you can see the time is here. So that's how we can perform post operation or a post request using Volley library. In the next video, we are going to fetch the rows from the call from this table, which is the task table. So there can be multiple rows, and we will see how we can display when we have different rows inside of this activity main file. So we will again use Volley library. We will again generate a new request and we will add it to this request queue. So it will be able to fetch the response from the server, and then we will display that data, and we will see how we can display that data inside of Android Studio, inside of our Android application. And basically we are going to use a very important view which is known as recycler view. So the next tutorial will be on recycler view. That is a very important tutorial because we are going to use recycler view to basically display all the rows of our table inside of the Android app that we are generating here, which is the to-do app. So that's all for this tutorial. If you have liked my efforts, make sure to subscribe our channel and support us. Thanks for watching.